All three games in the Biel Grandmaster Tournament in round 3 were long and tough. I'm going to show you, well, all three, just some extracts from those three games. So let's start with first to finish, which was the game between Alexander Motilev and Pantala Harikrishna. It was a Berlin defence. Oh yes, I know that's a real favourite with a lot of you. But as is so often the case, it was a really complex game. They arrived at this position after 20 moves. Harikrishna with the black pieces looks like he's doing extremely well. He has the two bishops, and you can see that White's pawn structure on the queen side is rather vulnerable. That pawn on b3, well, if that drops, then probably the other two will drop as well. Of course, White has some counterplay with this rook, but, well, black is looking good here, and after the game, Motilev said he was really worried. He exchanged off the bishop pair with bishop a3, but of course that left his rook very poorly placed at the side of the board. And here Harikrishna played rook e8, and he expected the game to continue with rook takes pawn and then simply rook into the middle, and well, black has superb pieces here. We'll probably get one pawn back. I mean, maybe the pawn on e5. He was also angling to play rook d3, looking at the b3 pawn, and well, it's an incredibly double-edged position. It's probably going to turn into a pawn race, but remember, with a bishop, it's much stronger than a knight. But rook e8 was actually a mistake, because the rook, Motilov simply moved the rook back to d2. And, well, as we'll see, the game started to turn in White's favour. Instead of rook e8, Harikrishna should have played rook a d8 first. He simply mixed up the move order. And of course now White is obliged to take the pawn, and then it would transpose to the line we just looked at, and well, black is very much in the game here. But yeah, after rook e8 he simply missed that the rook could return, and after this, after f4, well, now White is able to consolidate, because after rook a d8 this rook at the side returns to play into the game, protecting the rook here, and you can see that this pawn majority on the king side is starting to roll. I mean, black is still in the game after c5, but, well, I'm afraid one blunder followed another, and g5 was just a bit too eager. After this, Harikrishna still thought he was doing fine. He is, if he can, after taking on g5, he can take on e5, but here he overlooked this subtle rook move, and now the threat is just to play rook d1. So for example, if pawn takes pawn, then rook d1 wins material. He can still play on if he plays rook e7, but he played rook d7 instead. And now knight e4 was just a winning move. I think you can see, if, let's just go back, if he'd found rook e7, that wouldn't be so bad. Of course his intention is to double rooks on the d file, but after rook d7, knight e4 is an absolute killer. Can't be taken because the rook would be en prise, and in the meantime this is threatened as well as knight f6. That's why rook e7 would have been better. And after rook d8, knight takes g5, well, that pawn is really crucial, and well, White now has a completely winning position. And well, with Russian technique, Motilov sealed the deal and won in 43 moves. Okay, let's move on to the next game. Hou Yifan against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, a very long game. It lasted 6 hours. So the Frenchman with the black pieces, and well, he fought really hard to reach this position where he has some advantage, but it's still not clear. But I think it's very impressive the way that MVL now played. First of all, he used this H-pawn. This is an excellent move, because after here, you can see that White's king is now a little more exposed after this exchange of pawns. So it doesn't harm Black's king position that the H-pawn has gone, but in effect he's exchanged it for the F-pawn, and that means that White's king is now in some danger. It's more exposed. Okay, now he brought the queen round here. I mean, maybe he could have even gone for a quick attack on the king, but with queen h5 and knight f6. But, well, it's impressive to see how he made progress in this position in a completely different way. So he's manoeuvred the queen round. Okay, that prevents c5. And now the knight comes and attacks this pawn. Whoops, attacks this pawn. And now the queen comes in. So you can see there are certain weaknesses in White's position. The e-pawn, c-pawn sometimes, and the b-pawn. And the queen comes in. And now b3. Well, this is Black's trump, because of course if the b2 pawn disappears, then that's the end of the story. But also, Black is angling for this move, queen c2, which in the right moment can be deadly. At the moment after queen c2, then, well, probably the king will defend the queen. And now, how's Black going to make progress? Well, MVL improved the position of the knight. So you can see it takes away these squares from the king, but also still threatens the pawn on e4. And now the king came over. That can be useful, because sometimes White has this move c5, so sometimes the king is able to just come over to stop this d-pawn. And now Hou Yifan just gave away the b-pawn, and now, I mean, it really is over. She could still have fought with knight h3. You have to remember, they're now well into the 6th hour of play, and yeah, I mean, basically it's very hard to defend this position. After knight g5, after knight h3, sorry, Black would probably exchange knights and play queen c2, and White can still try to survive here with some kind of counterattack against the king, but okay, it's still Black should be doing very well here. Not definitely winning, but very good winning chances. So there we go. After queen takes b2, well, Yifan tried this sacrifice, but well, this was very easy to defend against, and yeah, Black won in a couple more moves. Okay, let's go on to the final game, which lasted 7 hours. Let me just switch games. So this was Giri against Radoslav Wojtaszek. Well, there was so much going on in this game. I could talk for 5 hours and not get to a conclusion about this game. There were so many ups and downs, but basically Giri was probably better right out of the opening, but Wojtaszek really fought so hard, and he's managed to get to this endgame where you can see that Giri is still 1 pawn up, but it's the only pawn on the board, and well, if Black can exchange this bishop for the pawn, then they'll reach an ending of rook and bishop against rook, which is a theoretical draw. And, well, it's pretty well known how one should defend in that case. But black's problem is that not only must he deal with the d-pawn here, he must also deal with threats to the king, but also sometimes just threats to the bishop. So this is much harder to defend than just a straight rook and bishop against rook endgame. And here, well, Wojtaszek, after defending so well for so long, he basically cracked. Bishop d7 was the best move, but it's so hard to divine that in this kind of position. He played king h5, and now king f4, and white is closing in. You can see that now actually there's a threat of mate with rook h3. So the king came back, and now this is a very common idea in this kind of position when you're attacking the king, that this rook switches from side to side, sometimes threatening checks here, sometimes threatening checks from this side. Very difficult to defend. I mean, maybe rook d1 was a last chance here, but it already looks very unpleasant. Probably white would play king e5 and continue this kind of mating attack a little later, but instead, after rook g8, bishop a4 was simply a blunder, and rook g6 is a winning move. Of course, if the king goes back to h7, then there's a terrible discovered attack like this. So the king came up, but now rook e6 is a winning move. The threat is simply bishop on e4 to f3, followed by rook h6, and the only way to stave off mate is to give up the rook, but clearly that is absolutely hopeless. The d-pawn is going to go through, or well, black will have to give up the bishop for the d-pawn, and obviously king and rook against king is a very different proposition to the endgame we were talking about earlier. So Giri won. So he's back after his 2 defeats in the first rounds. So today all 3 games were decisive. In fact, all 3 of the leaders lost, incredibly. But I think that shows what a very balanced tournament this is in terms of the strength of the players. You know, anyone could win this tournament, but after 3 rounds we have a sole leader, and that's Vachier-Lagrave with 2 out of 3.